Ora então, boas noites, boa tarde ou bom dia, depende da hora do dia que vocês vão ver este vídeo. Se for agora, aqui em Portugal é boa noite. Ora bem, como dá para ver no vídeo, na imagem, vamos voltar a falar do Unreal Engine, porque agora está na versão 5.3, ok? Eu mostrei aqui há uns tempos atrás uma das primeiras versões, e agora vamos a ver o que é que ele evoluiu, não é? Se calhar evoluiu pouco. O único problema é que eu acho que não vou ter PC para jogar qualquer jogo destes. Porque o nível de detalhes que estes jogos irão ter, jogos e não só, ok? Jogos e não só. Porque isto vai permitir fazer tipo ecrãs para fazer projeção de outras aplicações. Portanto, pode ser de trabalho. Não tenho não, Samuel. Não tenho não. E para o que já vais ver. Agora vamos então passar aqui o vídeo. Eu vou deixar ficar com as legendas, mas não queria porque rouba um bocado de espaço, mas assim vocês vão poder ver. E depois, se tiver que parar, eu paro.
Version 5.3 just released, and it is a big deal. The main reason is nanite landscapes. When Unreal Engine 5
Isto parece real.
a revolutionary new way to render geometry called nanite.
É comprar aquela gráfica da ASUS de 4.000 euros que eu fiz a live dela.
Planes of geometry called polygons. The more polygons you have in your environment, the longer it will take to render. This is why video games have made a system called level of detail, or LOD for short.
Que vai ser poder de processamento.
This makes games run faster, but we are limited in the amount of geometric detail.
Não é só gráfica, mas também CPU. Mas os detalhes que isto dá,
polygons without any LODs, because the geometry deforms, lowering the amount of polygons on an object. A good example of nanite in use is this city. If I come up to lit, nanite, triangles...
Esse é um dos programas que eles têm para funcionar. Aliás, já existe a hipótese de fazer download para a malta que quer testar o programa para fazer este tipo de renderizações, se quiser. Isto é fabuloso, parece real mesmo.
This changed with the Unreal Engine 5.1 update. It introduced nanite foliage.
Então a vegetação, puxa, sus.
With an unlimited amount of detail. Here's a world with over 100,000 trees without any LODs. But landscapes, which is the biggest part of any environment, was still missing nanites. Landscapes allow us to create large open worlds easily. Using the tool, we can sculpt
Isto é fabuloso.
And paint different materials quickly. This means landscapes were stuck using low-resolution geometry, and it hurt our game's performance because Unreal has a hard time rendering non-nanite objects.
Muito bom.
Epic Games release, to avoid these issues, they didn't use landscapes. Instead, they faked landscapes. This desert ground isn't actually a landscape. Instead, it is a bunch of nanite objects stacked on...
A questão é que realmente este motor está muito bem otimizado. Mas mesmo assim, se puserem isto nos jogos com este tipo de qualidade, ui.
Enable nanite and then build data. Now that it's enabled, we can watch the geometry dynamically deform. It is that easy to enable nanites on our landscapes. In the first version of UE5, we made this village on the channel. But at the time, the only objects using nanites were rocks and the buildings. Now in UE 5.3, the entire world is nanite. There isn't a
o 5.3 da versão que eles têm agora está muito mais avançado.
Detail from our environments, and the performance is a lot better. Nanite landscapes can now also use tessellation to add more detail. In UE4, we had tessellation, which allowed us to create displacements from a high texture. When Unreal Engine 5 released, it was removed, but now it is back and it is using nanites. This means we can change objects from the material editor. We have a brand new input called displacement, where the high texture goes. Tessellation can convert any simple mesh into an object with thousands of polygons just with a texture. Here,
a tecnologia está muito top.
And here's the same landscape with displacement. The ground has depth to it, and it looks a lot better. Everything you see on screen, except the plants, is the landscape. All the rocks, twigs, and roots are not
muito top.
They are a high texture. And whenever I make a change to my landscape, the nanite displacement remains in effect. For the first time in gaming, we're not limited by how many polygons are on screen. We can have infinite geometry everywhere. The next major feature is better volumetric fog and smoke. Unreal's had volumetric fog,
O fog,
which
o
lets
nevoeiro
us
e o fumo são das coisas mais complicadas de fazer na programação
fog is easy.
e
We
peso
just have to
nos
click
sistemas.
volumetric fog within the height fog to turn it on. Now we get dynamic fog that
Jesus.
interacts with the lighting. So I can move the sunlight around and you'll see those God rays change direction. It is the secret to make any of your environments stand out. Here are before and afters of an animation with and without volumetric fog. The world feels more realistic and it looks visually more interesting with fog. The only issue in Unreal was that it was problematic to create finely detailed fog. It could only be used to create large splashes, and it was hard to use volumetrics for complex.
A fazerem isto em tempo real é fantástico.
Instead, explosions and smoke had to be faked with billboards. Billboards are just a flat surface with an animated texture. You can see that this
Yeah.
is just one single plane.
Isso era o que era antigamente.
Actually 3D. Obviously, this doesn't look the best, because when I move the lighting in my environment, the smoke stays exactly the same. We don't see any changes because
Agora vai mostrar como é que eles fazem.
2D texture.
Né? Isto é conforme é agora.
Volume textures fix this. You can now
Jesus.
import complicated volumetric simulations.
Agora dá para simular mesmo.
Effects. Here is the
Fast.
sparse volume explosion imported from
Caralho.
effects into Unreal. And if I pause the simulation, you can see it is not being faked by billboards. This smoke simulation is completely 3D. If I move the light around,
Qualquer coisa.
dynamically change the way the smoke looks. The smoke is able to cast shadows onto itself. We can even use sparse volume textures to represent clouds. And what's amazing about these clouds compared to Unreal's default cloud system is that I can move them around and rotate them. So I get full control over where my clouds are in the sky. And if we zoom out, we can even see that these clouds are massive objects that I can move around and place them exactly where I want them to be. Volumes can even replace some particle effects.
Antigamente, para fazer isto numa animação,
Very similar to the
eles faziam coisa e o computador ficava a renderizar por horas.
2D planes that simulate a fire animation. And then if I look down directly at it, this effect immediately breaks. And now here's that particle effect, but it's replaced with a sparse volume texture. And this fire is now completely in 3D. It's not a 2D plane that's facing the camera. So if we look at it from the top down, the effect doesn't break.
Brutal.
Fire is real and it exists in our world. Another major feature is that we can now create animatable characters directly in Unreal Engine. In Unreal, we have been able to create rigs and animate characters. This animation you're looking at right now was animated entirely in Unreal. It wasn't created in another program like Blender or Maya. The biggest part missing in the character creation workflow was skeletal mesh editing, which is the process of creating bones in a character. UE 5.3 adds a skeletal mesh editor. This means we can create bones and weight paint directly in the editor. It is now possible in Unreal through modeling, weight painting bones, rigging, and animating using Sequencer to create an entire character just using Unreal. We also get a new cloth editor to create realistic simulations for clothes. Users can
Isto também vai ser espetacular, as roupas do pessoal.
And then artificial
Fazer interação.
make that interaction
Fogo.
into an animation. Reflections also got a major update. If you don't know, Unreal Engine 5
O reflexo é que também pesa muito no sistema quando se faz a animação.
bounce lighting in real time. It is important to know that bounce lighting is also called global illumination. Global illumination is a process of light rays bouncing around, illuminating your entire world. Before Lumen, game developers faked global illumination through a process called light baking. Light baking is rendering bounce lighting before the game is played. This render is then stored in a texture called a light map, which is then overlaid on top of the world to make it look like the light is bouncing around in real time, when in reality, it's just a pre-rendered texture. But now the problem is that global illumination isn't real time. As soon as I make a change to our light map, it is no longer in sync. We have to rebake the entire environment all over again, which is time consuming. This is why Lumen is a big deal, because it is true real-time global illumination. We don't have to bake our lights, but
Para mostrar
very expensive Not
como é que as tecnologias antigas funcionavam e como é que agora o sistema está a funcionar.
games like Valorant still use baked lighting. It is a competitive game, so every frame matters. If we open up a Valorant map in Unreal, you will see it using baked lighting. If I move an object, the light doesn't update until I rebake the environment. Even though Lumen exists, a lot of games still have to use baked lighting because it's just more performant. You could get 120 frames with baked lighting. It's hard to get that many frames with Lumen. Hardware hasn't caught up yet. This environment is using baked lighting, and when the issues with baked
Quer dizer que o hardware não,
reflections
ainda não acompanha o sistema. É o que eu digo.
broken because the reflections aren't working.
Isto vai ser preciso PCs da NASA.
In reflections by using a reflection capture within Visual Effects, Sphere Reflection Capture. This will capture a
Gostava de saber quanto tempo demorou a ser desenvolvido o Unreal.
onto any reflective surfaces. The workflow to get
Programação.
everywhere is that now I have to create another reflection capture and move it to where there's a bunch of reflections.
Era uma ideia saber isso.
Create another one, and then continue the process throughout the entire environment. And if we have a large environment, this process can be very tedious. Here's an environment that's using Lumen, and reflections work immediately. We do not need reflection captures. But the issue is that we had to use Lumen Global Illumination, which hurts our performance. In 5.3, we now have the ability to use Lumen
Está patrocinado pela Apple.
lighting. So we do not have to use Lumen Global Illumination to get Lumen reflections. To get this feature, go to the post-process volume and set Global Illumination to none. So we're using the baked lighting and not Lumen, and then set reflections to Lumen. Now we're using baked lighting for global illumination and only using Lumen for reflections. We get the high performance of static lighting with the accuracy of Lumen reflections. Plus, we no longer have to set up reflection captures. Also, Lumen reflection now supports multiple bounces. So let's say we have a mirror right here, and then across the hallway we have another mirror. Notice how we can't see the other mirrors in its reflection. That's because we don't have enough reflection bounces. So if we go back into the post-process volume on a reflection, we have a brand new setting called max reflection bounces. If I set this to 2, now we can see the user interface got a facelift. And now it is a lot easier to use.
Espelho consegue refletir o que o outro espelho está a mostrar, é fantástico.
And let's say there's a tool I use a lot, like Displace. Then I can right click and add to favorites. And now I can quickly access that tool within the favorites tab. Masked materials like foliage are now 20% faster. And there's more shadow
Isto é quase real.
to help optimize shadows. Unreal shadow system called virtual shadow maps are right now the main bottleneck to foliage. So this gives us more control over what types of shadows should trees cast. And finally, a big update for Mac users. Nanite is now supported on all Apple M2.
É, por isso é que estava ali a publicidade do Apple.
Access to both Lumen and Nanite. When UE5 first released, it didn't have either feature. This also means that Unreal Engine 5 with Lumen and Nanite will be able to run on the Apple Vision Pro. The programs you're developing now on Unreal could be used for the Apple Vision Pro in the future. The possibilities are endless for Unreal. These were all the major changes to UE 5.2, but these are just the ones I think are important. Of course, there's a bunch of other.
Gostei muito desta apresentação. Agora tem outro vídeo também, já vamos ver.
Unreal is more important than ever because half of all next-gen games are being made in UE5. There is no better time to learn Unreal Engine than now. Luckily for you, I have an entire free course right here on YouTube, which goes over the essentials to learn UE5. You can learn how to create this world using.
Já tem ali para ir fazer o curso. Agora tem aqui diretamente do Unreal. E vejam este pá, poderoso. Este só tem 1 milhão de pessoas. Vamos lá ver. Este é curtinho. Tirar som.
Introducing some exciting new experimental
As peças da roupa a mexer com.
the potential for more creative workflows directly.
Gosto muito das florestas.
With sparse volume textures, you can store and play back baked simulation data for volumetric effects such as smoke and fire. SVTs can be
Isso é fantástico.
or imported from OpenVDB files created in other 3D applications. And for cinematics, films, and other linear media, you can now use the path tracer for high-quality volumetric rendering, including global illumination, shadows, and scattering. Orthographic rendering is also now supported as an experimental feature, offering stylistic camera choices for games and visualization. It's available in the Unreal Editor and at runtime, with support for most UE5 features. Next up, an experimental new skeletal editor provides you with a variety of tools for working with your skeletal meshes, including the ability to paint skin weights. Another experimental feature set introduces a new panel cloth editor that delivers better looking simulations and adds support for a non-destructive cloth simulation workflow where you can trade off speed for precision. Cloth can also now be simulated and cached in-engine using the ML Deformer. On the virtual production front, in preparation for the next generation of LED production stages, we've added experimental support to in-display for SMPTE ST2110. This lays the groundwork for a range of configurations that open up new possibilities for LED stages, including having a dedicated machine for each camera frustum, maximizing the potential rendering resolution, increasing frame rate, and allowing for more complex scene geometry and lighting than previously possible. We've also added a cam rail actor that enables filmmakers to emulate traditional camera movement along tracks or on dollies. It provides the ability to choreograph camera settings at different control points along the path and supports both in-editor and VCam workflows. Talking of VCam, you can now browse takes directly on the iPad for review or re-recording, simultaneously stream different output for different team members, and record at a slower frame rate for easier capture of fast-moving action. And last but not least, you can now leverage additional CPU and memory resources when cooking content. These are just some of the highlights of what's new in Unreal Engine 5.3. You can find out more on our What's New page, where you'll also find a link to download the release if you're a new user. Otherwise, it's available right from your Epic Games launcher. Enjoy!
Futuro vai ser promissor. Agora não sei se vamos ter PCs. Isto é que é o problema. Eu não sei se eles têm aqui o site. Tem aqui. Eu não sei se isto tem. O que eu tive no site deles está aqui. Estamos aqui a falar, né? Tal, as renderizações, são os vídeos que estivemos a ver. Está aqui tudo, se quiserem tirar alguma dúvida. Se quiserem apresentar, se quiserem aprender, isto é as alterações que eles fizeram. Pá, é fantástico, os gráficos estão muito realistas. Então aqui o volume disto está no voeiro. O cabelo por acaso não mostrou, também está muito bom. Pá, o programa é enorme, ok? O programa é enorme. Eu acho que na outra parte eu tinha visto aqui uma opção que não sei se foi. Está fantástico. Está muito bom. Ai, meu Deus. Foi isto. Portanto, vai ainda há de vir mais apresentações. Portanto, eu sempre que aparecerem, eu venho sempre mostrar, porque acho que é bom divulgar. E para as pessoas também terem uma noção, quando estão agora a pensar em trocar de PCs, terem uma noção do que é que vos espera em termos de poder de processamento e peso que vai ter no sistema, ok? De qualquer maneira, o motor Unreal sempre foi muito bem otimizado, ok? Muito bem otimizado. E pronto, era só isto, era uma coisa pequenininha. Eu não sei se amanhã, no sábado, se eu vou fazer o vídeo que estava previsto fazer hoje, mas depois logo se vê. E depois passo a informação, tá bom? Muito obrigado, continuação e até mais.